Okay, you ought to have your notes out right now. We do know this is on my PowerPoint. If you go to my school webpage, PowerPoint's on there. But there are some things that you need to write down. So we're in Chapter 8, Section 2, and we're going to cover some of the revolutionary period in Europe in the 1800s, that is the 19th century. Now, if you look over at the lesson essential question, what was the result of the Congress of Vienna and Enlightenment thinking on Latin America, mid-19th century Europe, and the arts? Okay, we're on Section 2 right now. We'll be talking about the mid-19th century Europe. Remember, coming out of the Congress of Vienna, you had a conservative movement. Okay, there are three types of political philosophies that we want to talk about during pretty much the 1800s in Europe: conservative, liberal, and radical. Keep in mind, these words are not the same as we use them today. Conservative then is not conservative now. Okay, this is just what we call them. So the conservatives were the idea of conservatism came from the Congress of Vienna. Metternich, y'all remember the Metternich rap? Okay, so that was the Congress of Vienna. That was pushed by nobility types, landowners, and that promoted monarchs. Okay, all right, that was going back to the legitimate kings. The second, liberalism, or a liberal philosophy. Okay, these liberals, these were like the bourgeoisie. These were guys who were educated, intelligent, had a little bit of money, had some land maybe. If you look back to the French Revolution, it was those type of people who started the revolution. Okay, these were the bourgeoisie. These were the ones that were very much impacted by the Enlightenment thinking. Okay, so what were some of, when we say the word Enlightenment thinking, so what are some of the things that you think about?
Life,
Jetty?
the importance of others, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay, very good. The importance of people, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. What else?
Right.
David? Value of the individual.
Right to vote.
Right to vote. So the right to vote was really big in some of these revolutions in the middle of the 1800s, and I'll get to that in a minute. That was enlightened. Secular ideas, moving away from the power of the church, still worldly type things. Okay, freedoms. What are the freedoms? Freedom of speech, press, religion, and there's some others too. Okay, individuals. Okay, all right, let's go. These were liberals. Liberals liked the Enlightenment philosophy. They wanted Enlightenment philosophy. Everything's good there. Now, the third were radicals. Okay, the radicals, it says here, they believed in liberty, equality, and they wanted everyone to have a vote. So in this time, the radicals believed in universal male suffrage. Universal means everybody. Male means men, so really it's all men. Suffrage means vote. Universal male suffrage. The radicals wanted all men to be able to vote. This was pretty radical for the time. It would be as radical today as if we said, if there was a group of people that said all Americans should vote as soon as they could speak and check a box with a pencil, they should be able to vote. So you'd have 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds voting. Doesn't make any sense. It also didn't make sense to a lot of people back then for everyone to vote. Now the radicals didn't want women to vote, just men, but it was still a radical belief. All right, so these were the three philosophies at the time, okay, influenced by Congress of Vienna and Enlightenment thinking. Now, nationalism was also a very big force, and there was, nationalism at this point is the good part of nationalism. It was like people have a national identity, and they wanted to form a nation because they thought they were so cool they'd form a nation. That was a good part of nationalism. There are two ways a nation started. We'll talk about this type of nationalism. One is when a group of people are within an empire and then they break away from the empire and start their own nation. And another is when there's a whole bunch of small, countries, really small countries, and then they decide to get together because they all speak the same language and form one big country or like an empire. We'll talk about that. So two types of nationalism. So you've got a couple of vocabulary words here: nation state, nation with its own independent government. Okay. Remember, nationalism, as opposed to having a king and being a subject in a kingdom. Okay, in nations they have citizens. Okay, so all right, make sure you're following along with me here. I know y'all are doing a good job writing everything down. You got your PowerPoints out, but try to stay with me. Try to follow with me too. All right, so here's the first. Maybe we'll talk about with this independence or this nationalism was the Greeks. So here's my good map right here. You'll notice the Greeks formed a country. It was called Greece, and they spoke language. They spoke Greek. Okay, so right here they broke away from the Ottoman Empire. Now, if you remember, the Ottoman Empire used to be really huge. Used to cover all of this here, but they gradually began to lose power over the years. Okay. The 1830s, so write down 1830 uprisings. What we call these uprisings, they weren't like completely revolutionary because they didn't change the government, although they affected some of the way that the governments treated people. But in Belgium, the people in Belgium, they had a full-blown revolution, and they got separated from the Netherlands. So instead of having the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Belgium formed their own country right there. So that was good for them. Some other things I have up here in Italy and in Poland. So Italy, there were people here, especially in northern Italy, that were ruled by Austria, and they didn't want to be ruled by Austria. So they had these nationalistic feelings. They were Italian. They spoke Italian. Their friends were Italian. They wanted to form an Italy. Okay? The Poles. You'll notice here, it says Poland, but they were really part of Russia. But there were some uprisings here because they just didn't like being controlled by Russia. They wanted to have their own country. All right. So one of the last bullet we have on here talks about how these uprisings kind of pushed the envelope of liberalism and nationalism, but in the end, for the most part, conservatives were still in power. Now the next batch is the 1848 revolutions. This is really important at this time for European history. And if you'll open your book to page 245, there's a really good map in there on where these revolts and riots happened. So all those red dots on that map were where they had revolts throughout Europe. You'll notice there were many in the Austrian Empire. The red dots you see in the Austrian Empire happened mostly because those people that lived there wanted to kind of start their own countries, because the Austrian Empire had at least 10 different languages in it. So these languages were, these people, they were thinking about starting their own countries, their own nation, right? Nationalism. All right. In other parts of Europe, the 1848 revolutions were more about voting rights. In kind of the area that we now call Germany, they were about voting rights. People wanted universal male suffrage. And so that was going on at this time. In those areas, the governments, do you need some context solution? Okay. So those governments in those situations, they kind of told the people, hey, we're going to give you some voting rights. So the riots stopped. And then after they stopped, the governments never really gave them voting rights. Okay. So that's why it says liberals hold power for a short time, but conservatives come back in shortly after that. All right. The other one is more 1848 revolutions, is the French. Now, we all know the French are crazy. They are absolutely politically crazy. They change their government every couple of years or so. Of course, during the French Revolution, every year. And then ever since then, about every 15 years. Now, they're a little more stable now, and that's good for them. But during this period, they were totally crazy. 1830, there was, when everybody was having these uprisings, they changed their government again then, wrote a new constitution. At some point, they wanted to go back to the old revolutionary calendar. But that was just the people in Paris, because, you know, the people in Paris, they were crazy. The poor people of Paris were just nuts. Now, if you remember this picture right here, and I need to show this to you on YouTube. This is the most famous painting from the French Revolution. Okay, this is Lady Liberty leading the revolutionaries. So this is on the History Channel DVD of the French Revolution. But guess what? This painting was from 1830. Okay. So that goes to show you how many different French revolutions there were, riots, revolts, rebellions in France and in Paris. And so, but anyway, this is not French Revolution. It says French Revolution, but the painting is from 1830. And I'll show you some other stuff on that artistic stuff, really cool art stuff Monday. All right, so 1848 happens in France, and the uprisings then. The Paris mob overthrows the monarchy. They set up a new republic. Again, a bunch of radicals infighting. They didn't get out the guillotine this time, though, so that was good. But they called for a new constitution. They elected a new president. His name, Louis Napoleon. Two of the greatest names in French history. Louis, because all the kings were Louis, well, except for Charlemagne and all that. And then Napoleon, after the greatest emperor the French ever had, Emperor Napoleon, right? Okay. And actually, he was actually a pretty good ruler. Rather high amount of stability. He also industrialized France considerably, built railroads. Not as many as the Germans, but he built railroads and industrialized. Now, we'll talk about industrialization next week, but industrialization, real quick, is when humans make factories, and factories make stuff better, faster, and more people can have them. And do y'all remember in 7th grade, y'all watched a documentary called America, The Story of Us? And it talked a lot about industrialization. If you remember, it's really cool video just showing how things were made. Of course, that was America, but Europe had industrialization too, especially Western Europe. We'll talk about that next week. This guy did a great job towards industrialization. Okay, let's talk about Russia. Russia, historically, has always been a very backward country. You can notice it's a very big country. It's really big and it's really yellow. And it was very agricultural, and there was lots of serfs. Now, you remember serfdom. It's not exactly slavery like we had in the United States, but if you were a serf, you really didn't have very many rights. You worked for the guy who owned all the land, and in Russia it was even worse, because if you were a serf in Russia, you were legally not allowed to leave that land unless you had permission from the guy who owned it. So there was a lot of bad stuff with serfdom. Alexander II was the Tsar who ended serfdom, and he sold us Alaska. Okay? Alaska was the second best real estate deal in history. What was the first best real estate deal in history?
Louisiana.
Evelyn? The Louisiana Purchase. That was the best deal. Russia was number 2. Okay? We got a ton of land in 1867. Now, Alexander II, he was the Tsar. He made other changes. He tried to modernize Russia, because remember, Russia was always backwards. They were technologically, they were very backwards. Okay? Oh, I need somebody to come read. Who can read for me? Come on up. Just put this on your neck. When you're done, give it back. Go ahead.
Alexander II made up his own mind to abolish serfdom rather than wait for it to be abolished through revolution. The emancipation of the serfs in 1861 was the single most important event in 19th century Russian history. It was the beginning of the end for the landed aristocracy's monopoly of power.
All right, very good. All right, a couple things I want to talk about on this. Alexander II abolished serfdom rather than wait for it to be abolished through revolution. He probably knew enough to know that angry peasants make great revolutionaries, and he wanted to sort of give them freedom so they wouldn't completely take over. Now, I'll just let you know, when they did abolish serfdom, there was still, the serfs were still very poor. They will be poor for a very long time. They got land, but they had to sign 49-year leases. So that's a long time to pay off land. But anyway, next, what else? Okay, so important history. All right. It did not, the aristocracy didn't like it, so he kind of got in trouble with it a little bit. But freeing the serfs was the biggest part of Russian history during that time. Okay, so if you didn't write it down already, Alexander II emancipated the serfs. He still had problems, all that, and eventually he was assassinated by terrorists. All right, so Alexander III, he was the next Tsar. He did try to continue industrialization. He tried to modernize Russia, which a lot of people have tried to do. It's been very difficult for them over the years. Alexander III was also very powerful. He did not like dissent, so if anybody went against the government, he would try to find ways to get them out and move them to some sort of location or have them killed one way or another, which is a very Russian thing. The Russian people have always used to having very strong, overbearing, powerful rulers that really don't give them very many rights. That happened with the czars. It happened during the Soviet Union with the Communist Party and the Politburo. People didn't have rights. Putin right now, really powerful, strong leader. Not sure what the rights are like in Russia right now, but the people are used to having overbearing, strong, powerful rulers in Russia. Okay, that's the end of section 2.